Okay, let's look at this next game. C4 got 2 exclam points. He's playing a young player here. And I've played b6 a bunch myself. I think it's worthy. I've always played e6 here. Is knight f6 playable? Probably. All right, queen c2, and now d5. Very interesting. I've never seen this position before. I'm not sure it exists. But one thing that's interesting, actually, we're talking about Viktor Mikulevsky. I had an ancient game with him years and years ago where it went e6, e4, and I played queen, no. Bishop b4, queen c2, queen h4. And I mention that because we're going to get something mildly similar in this game. All right, so we're going to transpose to what we're going to call a Grunfeld structure, and white plays e5. Black plays e5, excuse me. Very interesting. My initial take on this is that white shouldn't take on e5. But it's a little bit difficult not to take on e5, because if, say, knight f3, snip, snip, check, what do? Right? In this position, you'd have to take back with the king. I don't want to do that. That's too complicated for me. So e5, a very interesting move. By the way, these next 2 games are going to be our endgames. We always have some interesting endgames, but these are going to be our endgame section, even though this looks like it's not going to go to an endgame. All right, knight f3, castles, f6, exclam, good. We got this attack on both sides, very interesting position, and now everything is going to soon come off. Fasha writes, I think black is equalized. Now, it's funny. Equal is not the word I would use, just because it's so violent here. Very hard for me to say who's better here and why. Yeah, to me it looks like I would give it the unclear symbol. In fact, let's move in here. I'm going to adjust it to just my own. I'm going to give it an unclear symbol over here. I have no idea what to think about this position. The only general rule of thumb I can give here is that the player who has the better king is going to be in a much better situation with the heavies. And that's what we're going to get very soon here in this heavy middle game. So, rook e7, queen e1, nice move. And now h5, definitely a funky looking move. And interestingly, one of the things that Fasha has questions about is, why does Stockfish want to play king b7? I think it's both in this position and then in a later position. And the reason is pretty clear to me anyways, is that, again, the main thing that's going to decide this is whose king is better. So, for example, queen d4 is pretty too computery for me, because after rook c1 there will be an initiative against the black king. But on king b7, I'm going to control a lot of squares, and if rook c1, I have rook c6, and I'm holding everything together. So h5 is wrong, let's call it spiritually or whatever you want to call it, because we're not interested really in keeping our h-pawn, and we don't have time to play h4, h3. We need to improve our king. And we're going to see that in this game too. So rook c1. And now I would say white is fine. I don't agree with the assessment that black is a little bit better here, just because his king seems to be off. h3, probably not the best move either, but in any case, I didn't like this is terrible, queen e4. All right, so now we're going to get to the part of the game I thought was most interesting, where queen e4, let's talk about why it's wrong. And you correctly say made me feel really comfortable. And also you write, this move is not a mistake according to Stockfish. Right. So when you think about black's position, it's like, well, if I can play like king b7, I should hopefully feel safe enough. White can try to knock my queen off of the c6 square and all. But in general, white's hope should be that his king might somehow be safer and his rook more active. After queen e4, though, my king is suddenly better. And that's going to be the deciding feature, I think, of what comes here, where, let's look, rook d5, and by the way, what should white do? He should start bringing his king in. Instead, he goes pawn hunting. Good move. And now there's just a very simple dynamic which is going to be set in motion here, where it's going to lead to Fasha winning the game, which is that this king is the shepherd of this c-pawn, and he is simply winning the tempo race for both being able to push the thing and for the king being able to help that pawn advance. The pawn needs the rook and the king's help to advance. Mistake, because you're helping the king up. Mistake, c5. Good move. Good move. King c7. Probably a good move, though I want to stress just naturally king c5 really seems like it's got to be correct because the king wants to come up and help the pawn. And then once we play c3, we can think about things like rook c4. In any case, I thought this was very instructive and nice. White needs to at least have thought about king e2 right now. But now, yeah, look at this very nice endgame play. And right, this should be winning. And we're going to zugzwang him out. Very nice. And it's all over. So, beautiful game, Fasha, yeah. And I'm happy to say that you beat some kid. And that's how we want to treat the kids these days. They don't deserve any better. They deserve to suffer. And they deserve to especially suffer in the end game. So here we go. Let's go to Marty. Marty's been on the show a bunch. And he's black, so let's switch it around. By the way, in the notes, Marty wrote his own name as white, but just the way he talked about it, I was assuming that he was actually black, so I switched it up. And I think I've made this same mistake in Blitz before. It's not a game-ending mistake, but I think I'm going to call it a mistake. And that is when white can force the knight to a6 like this, it's not the end of the world, but the drama is that knight is so bad on a6, so incredibly bad, right, that it really cramps black's style. And not only that, but he can't dislodge the knight on b5 very easily. All right, c3, a4, right, and knight d6 is, of course, something white could have played, but I think he's correct not to do it because, well, it would have been totally fine, but this is even nicer because it's so hard to get rid of the knight on b5. Here was an interesting moment. I wasn't sure about if you could have played knight h5 to try to get rid of the bishop. I was thinking maybe white wanted to play h3 first. Okay, so here we go. And c4. Again, I think you should be thinking about knight h5, and white should have been thinking about h3. Now, there's a lot of lines in the London where, sometimes you let black take on f4. But this diagonal right now is really cramping black's style. So, especially here, I'd like to keep the bishop. Could I summarize general rules when playing the endgame? Well, hopefully. This is going to come to an endgame too, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about it. c4, and this is definitely, it definitely at least feels wrong. But your position is under a lot of stress. I'm going to guess for whatever reason you weren't thinking about knight h5. Knight h5 now is a really good move. And if you don't see knight h5, then it's hard to see, what you're going to do with this knight. So clearly when you played c4, you were creating a story in your mind about taking here and then coming back, as happens in the game. But now you don't have any pressure here, and white should by all means play b3, after which I'm going to say, so I don't know, something like clearly better. Okay, so knight e5, I didn't understand that move. I'm not sure I'm thrilled with that one either. Here we go, knight c7. I thought, again, like queen a4 here. That looked awkward. And I think b6, right? You mentioned knight c6 is not that big of a deal. But okay. Unfortunately for us, this is going to all go bad. Where white is going to be clearly better in this position, but you do regain the pawn. So the question is, how bad is this position? Yeah, interesting question. One obvious thing we should say is that well, look, we're talking about obvious rook endgame rules. The 4 versus 3 situation is generally a draw, but white can, if we just imagine rooks on the board for 4 versus 3, like these would be gone and just rooks, that would be holdable for black, but you can really massage a guy, especially if you're able to push your h-pawn to h5. This position is a much better try for white, maybe also a draw, but you can definitely give a try just with the rooks on. With the bishops on, I'd like to think that that increases white's winning chances. But right now, the grief for white is that his bishop and king have a little bit of a coordination issue. So for example, I'd really like it if, as white, I could play g4 and king g2. So those pieces are getting a little body slammed right now. Not sure that rook b1 helps. And here I was thinking that white should think about h4, with the notion of saying, well, you know what, I'm going to need to play things like h5, move the bishop somewhere. Could be here. Honestly, that looks pretty dumb, but you could put it there, just so you could play g4 and then come back. Some idea like that. But white kind of definitely lost the thread here, and f4 is a terrible move. And one endgame principle, since we talked about endgame principles, is that you shouldn't put your pawns on the same color as your bishop, and now a very nice f5. Locking the pawn. For another famous f5, just came to my mind, you can watch my move of the day from round 1 on YouTube, on the ChessDojo YouTube channel, where I talked about Wang Hao's, I called it Wang Hao's positional secret. That was from round 1 where he beat Ding Liren. f5 was the critical move there. Not the same position, but there it just came to my mind, thought I'd mention it. And here black totally resolves most of his griefs. And what happened here? You know, white's cruising for a bruising, and then all of a sudden he has to resign. So Marty, well done. You survived. Yeah. Not only did you survive, you somehow won that thing. If we can just imagine back here somewhere, or rather way back even further, if anyone had told, even further, if anyone had told us that white was losing here, especially before f4, you'd say to yourself, what? How could white possibly lose this position? But it shows anything's possible.